Have you ever felt truly alone, surrounded by nothing but silence? So quiet, it feels alive. Imagine being in an isolated cabin deep in the mountains during the dead of winter, with snow piling up and cutting you off from the world. At first, it feels like a dream, until the dream turns into a nightmare. An eye staring from the shadows of the forest. What if the silence isn't empty at all? What if it's watching, waiting? This is my story. A warning for anyone who dares to venture too far into winter's grass. Winter had always been my favorite season. I loved the biting cold that turned my breath into mist, the crisp silence of snow covered forests, and the way the world seemed to slow down under a blanket of white. So, when I inherited my grandfather's old cabin deep in the Rocky Mountains, I jumped at the chance to spend a few weeks there during the dead of winter. The drive up was serene. The snowflakes fell thick and fast, blanketing the world in an eerie stillness. The cabin sat at the edge of a dense forest, its roof heavy with snow. It was rustic but sturdy, built decades ago by my grandfather. He had lived there until his death last spring, and I remembered his tales of winters spent by the roaring fireplace, watching the snow pile up against the windows. When I arrived, I lit a fire and unpacked my belongings. The cabin smelled faintly of pine and old wood. Everything seemed perfect. That night, I sat by the window, sipping hot tea and watching the snow fall. The forest was dark, its towering trees swaying slightly in the wind. But there was something unsettling about the silence. It wasn't the peaceful quiet I had expected. It felt heavy, almost oppressive. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to being alone in an isolated place. Cases. I found them one morning, fresh in the snow. They were small, almost childlike, leading from the edge of the forest to the cabin. At first I thought they might belong to an animal, but the shape was distinctly human. I followed the tracks to where they ended abruptly, just a few feet from the cabin's front door. There were no tracks leading away, as if whoever or whatever had made them had simply vanished. That night, I heard footsteps crunching in the snow outside. They circled the cabin, slow and deliberate. I grabbed a flashlight and looked out the window, but I saw nothing. The tracks were there the next morning, spiraling around the cabin in a way that made my stomach turn. The third night was worse. I woke to a faint tapping on the window. My heart raced as I sat up, straining to listen. The tapping continued, slow and rhythmic, as if someone or something was trying to get my attention. I mustered the courage to look, my breath fogging up the glass. Outside, the snow-covered ground was empty, but when I shone the flashlight into the trees, I saw figures standing just beyond the tree line. It was small, no taller than a child, and its silhouette was unnervingly still. The light caught its eyes, reflecting back an unnatural glow. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest. Sometimes it would be as if the object was trying to objectificate into somehow complete invisibility, and its silhouette was unnervingly still. It was small, not tall enough to be object recollected from the sky. When I looked again, the figure was gone. The next day, I resolved to leave. I packed my belongings and loaded them into the car. But when I tried to start it, the engine wouldn't turn over. The battery was dead. I cursed my luck and went back inside to wait out the storm, hoping the roads would clear and I could flag someone down for help. That night, the whispers started. They were faint at first, blending with the howling wind, but as the hours passed, they grew louder, more distinct. They came from all around me, murmuring in a language I couldn't understand. I locked the doors and windows, huddling by the fire with a knife in my hand. The whispers continued, relentless and maddening. Tell nothing, demanded. Then the lights went out. The fire flickered and died. I froze, my blood turning to ice. The voice came from inside the cabin. The next moments were a blur. I remember running, bursting out of the cabin into the freezing night. The snow was deep and the wind howled around me, but I didn't stop. I didn't dare look back. The forest seemed alive, the trees bending and creaking as if reaching for me. Shadows darted between the trunks, and the whispers followed me, growing louder and more frantic. I stumbled and fell, my face hitting the snow. When I looked up, I saw them. I screamed and pushed myself to my feet, running blindly through the forest. The cold bit into my skin and my lungs burned, but I didn't stop. Somehow, I made it to the road. The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence. I collapsed onto the icy pavement, gasping for air. A passing snowplow found me the next morning. The driver said I was lucky to be alive, that the temperatures had dropped dangerously low overnight. I didn't tell him about the whispers or the figures in the forest. I never went back to the cabin. It still stands, buried in snow, waiting for its next visitor. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the whispers again, faint and far away. They're calling me back. Have you ever felt like something was watching you, even when no one was there? Imagine being in a remote lodge, surrounded by a forest buried in snow. At first, it feels like the perfect escape, peaceful, quiet, and untouched by the chaos of life. But what if the silence wasn't empty? What if the woods were alive, hiding something that watches, waits, and knocks? This is my story, a chilling reminder that some places aren't meant to be disturbed. Winter in the countryside always had a charm to it. The stillness, the snow-blanketed fields, and the icy tranquility that seemed to stretch forever. When I found the small isolated lodge available for rent, it felt like the perfect escape from the grind of city life. A month of peace and solitude in the heart of winter was exactly what I needed. We heard and thanked the receiver, then began to was prepared, was now close to 66 section to the nearest town. It seemed too good to be true. With a stone fireplace, thick wooden beams, and large windows that looked out onto the snowy expanse. It seemed too good to be true. And perhaps it was. Despite the large, the intrigue of the little incumbent, suddenly tender aliens form, 2 floors below, and a 5 meters expanse, and number 2 floor, displus metas, SP strongly expanded the balconies, and 2 rooms made music from the many players, when beyond a vast expanse. From the moment I arrived, something felt off. The caretaker, an older man named Garrett, handed me the keys and gave me a quick tour. He was gruff, his hands trembling slightly as he pointed out the utilities. Before leaving, he turned to me with a serious expression. "Don't wander too far into the woods," he said, "and if you hear anything strange, stay inside." I laughed nervously, thinking it was just a scare tactic for an out-of-towner. But the way his eyes darted toward the forest made my stomach knot. The first few days were uneventful. I spent my time reading by the fire, taking long walks, and admiring the beauty of the untouched snow. But as the days grew colder, the forest began to feel less inviting. It utters with the tracks. They appeared on the second morning, a set of footprints leading from the edge of the woods to the front porch. They were small, like those of a child, and they stopped abruptly at the door. I frowned, brushing off the unease. Perhaps someone from town had come by and turned back. Then I saw a dropit, uh, the a set of footprints leading from the edge of the woods to the front porch. That night, as I sat by the fire, I heard it. Faint knocking sound echoed from the windows. I froze, straining to listen. It wasn't the wind. Hey, it was deliberate, rhythmic, as if someone were tapping lightly on the glass. Is this madness? Is this all running out of my mind? Was it my brain trying to play tricks on me? I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached the nearest window. Outside, the snow sparkled under the moonlight, untouched and pristine. But when I shone the light toward the tree line, my heart nearly stopped. Surprised I was, they started finding a figure stood there, half hidden among the trees. It was small and pale, its features obscured by the shadows, but I could feel its gaze fixed on me. I backed away from the window, heart pounding. When I looked again, the figure was gone. The figure was gone. The next day, I decided to explore the forest, hoping to find some rational explanation for what I had seen. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. The birds stopped chirping, and even the wind seemed to die down. It felt as if the forest were holding its breath. An active alarm began to blare. It was Act 1 of the... Then I found it. A clearing with a circle of trees that looked unnaturally twisted. At the center was a pile of stone covered in frost. Something about the arrangement felt deliberate, almost ritualistic. The area was partly uncovered by a plant. 3 or 4, 5, 6, and 5 unfinished buildings. Then I found it at clearing with a black ball on brown draft, black ball on the laborious task. As I stood there, a chill ran down my spine, and I had the sudden overwhelming urge to leave. The forest felt alive, watching, waiting. That night, the knocking returned. This time, it was louder, more insistent. It moved from window to window, circling the lawn. I locked the doors and pulled the curtains, trying to block out the noise. But then I heard footsteps inside. They were faint, coming from the second floor. My chest tightened as I realized I wasn't alone. Gripping the fireplace poker, I crept upstairs. The hallway was dark, the air colder than it should have been. At the end of the hall, I saw it, my bedroom door slowly creaking open. I stepped closer, heart racing, and pushed the door wide. The room was empty, but the window was open, snow blowing in. Electric ton kora, pompi, puppy tackle, na ho beta board. I slammed it feta. I slammed it, retreated downstairs. Retreated downstairs, retreated down Marcus, whole targets, nuts of all sorts of products, and streaming drop letters. Then I slammed it shut, then retraced my steps. Through the window, the figure stood at the edge of the woods. Closer this time, its head tilted unnaturally, as if studying me. Ah! Exclaimed my uncle, stunned, and started forward. I turned off the lights, hoping to make myself less visible. I didn't sleep that night. By dawn, I packed my things and started the car, desperately lost. The forest seemed darker, the trees looming closer as I drove down the icy road. But just as I thought I was free, I saw it. The figure was clearer now. Its face was pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to suck in the light. It raised one hand, pointing back toward the forest. I swerved to avoid it, my car skidding on the ice. When I looked back, the figure was gone, but the whisper started, a faint, chilling sound that seemed to come from everywhere. I didn't stop until I reached the town. Garrett was waiting for me, his expression grim. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked, and nodded, too shaken to speak. He sighed, "The forest doesn't let go of its own. You'd best not return." Haven't. But even now, in the dead of winter, I sometimes hear the knocking.